The Senate chamber pulsed with a restless energy, the kind that settles over a room when a verbal duel is about to ignite. At the heart of it sat Tulsi Gabbard, her presence steady, yet commanding, her navy suit crisp and professional, her eyes sharp, like a strategist reading the terrain before a battle. Rows of polished mahogany benches stretched across the floor, filled with reporters clutching notepads, aides whispering to one another, and onlookers leaning forward, their gazes darting between the raised dais where the senators sat and the witness table below. The room, with its towering ceilings and heavy burgundy drapes, seemed to amplify every sound. A rustle of papers, a stifled cough, a quiet murmur, each adding to the weight of the moment. Across the chamber, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, known to the world as AOC, sat with a purposeful lean, her hands gripping a pen tightly, her face a mix of resolve and thinly veiled scorn. The air between them crackled with unspoken rivalry, a silent overture to a confrontation that no one could fully predict, but everyone felt brewing. The clash began with a single piercing question, crafted not just to probe, but to wound. AOC's voice sliced through the chamber, clear and deliberate, as she fixed her eyes on Gabbard. "Ms. Gabbard," she said, her tone sharp with a practiced edge, "I find it curious that someone with your, shall we say, dated law degree thinks they can lecture us on the complexities of modern policy." The words landed like a well-aimed dart, and a ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, a mix of shock and anticipation. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching against paper like a swarm of insects, while aides exchanged quick glances, sensing the gauntlet had been thrown. AOC paused, letting her words linger, her gaze locked on Gabbard, as if daring her to flinch. "I mean, no offense," she continued, her slight smirk betraying the insincerity, "but a degree from decades ago doesn't exactly scream expertise in today's world, does it?" The room seemed to hold its breath, the weight of her words settling like a sudden chill. Younger aides nodded subtly, their phones buzzing with drafts of tweets framing AOC's attack as a bold takedown of an out-of-touch figure. The narrative was taking shape, the dynamic congresswoman schooling a relic of the past. But Gabbard didn't stir. Her face remained steady, almost serene, as if she'd faced such jabs countless times, and had long since mastered the art of not taking the bait. Her hands rested lightly on the table, fingers interlaced, her gaze fixed on AOC, not with anger, but with a quiet calculation, like a chess player studying the board before a decisive move. The silence stretched, and what had seemed like AOC's moment of triumph began to feel unsteady. The crowd waited, expecting a quick retort, a flash of indignation, or at least a flicker of discomfort. But Gabbard offered nothing. Her calm was unnerving, a silent force that sapped the momentum from AOC's attack. Reporters poised for a soundbite hesitated, their pens hovering over notepads. Aides, sensing a shift, leaned forward, their whispers fading into the heavy air. Gabbard tilted her head slightly, the faintest trace of a smile. Not a smirk, but a hint of knowing, playing at the corner of her mouth, as if she held a card her opponent couldn't see. The chamber was no stranger to verbal sparring. These hearings were often stages for ego, where politicians postured for cameras and sound bites, each vying for a viral moment. But this felt different. AOC's attack wasn't just a policy dispute. It was personal, a direct challenge to Gabbard's legitimacy, her education, her very place in the room. She'd chosen her words carefully, painting Gabbard as a figure whose credentials were dusty, irrelevant, in a world of bold reforms and new ideas. For a moment, it seemed to work. Younger audience members nodded, and a few reporters tapped out tweets framing the exchange as AOC's latest triumph. The narrative was clear: the progressive firebrand had put an outdated figure in her place. Yet Gabbard's silence was rewriting that story second by second. She didn't rise to the bait, didn't lash out, didn't even raise her voice. Instead, she reached for a leather folder on the table, its edges worn but elegant, the kind carried by someone with years of meticulous work behind them. The movement was deliberate, unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world. The room watched, curiosity piqued, as Gabbard opened the folder, slowly revealing a stack of papers neatly organized inside. She didn't speak, didn't acknowledge AOC's taunt, but her every action radiated confidence, a quiet assurance that she held the reins. AOC, sensing the shift, pressed harder. "I'm just saying, Ms. Gabbard," she said, her voice sharp, but tinged with impatience. "The world has moved on. We need fresh perspectives, not folks resting on laurels from a degree earned when fax machines were still cutting edge." The jab drew a few nervous chuckles from the audience, but they were tentative, as if the room sensed the tide turning. Gabbard's silence was no longer just a pause, it was a statement. She pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder and held it up, not waving it dramatically, but letting it be seen. The paper was crisp, official, bearing the seal of a federal court. She didn't read from it, didn't need to. Its presence alone shifted the room's focus. AOC's smirk faltered just for a moment, as she realized she might have misjudged her opponent. Gabbard finally spoke, her voice low and steady, carrying a calm that blended warmth with authority. "Congresswoman," she began, pausing just long enough to draw every ear. "I don't think it's my degree. That's the issue here." The words were simple, unadorned, but they cut through the chamber like a blade. She didn't raise her voice, didn't gesture wildly, but the weight of her presence filled the room. Reporters stopped writing, aides stopped whispering, and even AOC seemed to freeze her pen, hovering over her notes. Gabbard's eyes never left her, and in that moment, it was clear she wasn't just responding, she was setting the stage for something bigger. The crowd leaned in, sensing the shift. Gabbard's calm was not the retreat of someone cornered. It was the poise of a woman who'd faced tougher challenges and emerged stronger. She placed the paper back in the folder, closing it with a soft snap that echoed in the now silent chamber. The hearing had only just begun, but the energy had changed. AOC's initial confidence seemed to waver, her notes now a shield rather than a weapon. Gabbard, meanwhile, sat as she had from the start, calm, composed, her folder resting on the table like a quiet promise of more to come. Reporters were no longer typing out AOC's soundbite. They were watching Gabbard, waiting for her next move. Aides, too, were captivated, some scribbling notes, others whispering about the paper she'd held up. What was it? A letter A. Case record. Whatever it was, it had shifted the room's gravity, pulling all eyes toward the woman who'd taken a personal attack and turned it into an opportunity to show her strength. The confrontation wasn't over. AOC was too sharp, too determined to let the moment pass without a fight. But Gabbard had set the tone, and the room knew it. She'd absorbed the challenge, met it with quiet resolve, and signaled she was ready for whatever came next. The chamber buzzed with the aftershock of the opening clash, the air heavy with unspoken questions about what Gabbard would do next. And the world was watching. The polished mahogany table before Gabbard gleamed under the chamber's lights, reflecting the faint outline of her leather folder, now a focal point as much as she was. She sat with the same unruffled calm, her hands resting lightly on the folder, her eyes steady but warm, like someone who'd long ago learned to trust her instincts in a fight. AOC across the dais gripped her pen tighter, her posture betraying a flicker of unease. She'd landed her blow, mocking Gabbard's law degree as a relic, but Gabbard's measured response, or lack thereof, had thrown her off balance. The crowd sensed it too, their murmurs softening as they leaned forward, eyes darting between the two women, waiting for the next move in this high-stakes duel. Gabbard's silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy.
She'd faced opponents who thought they could outtalk or outmaneuver her, only to find themselves undone by her preparation and patience. Now in this Senate chamber, she was playing the same game, but the stakes were higher, the audience larger. The room's attention remained fixed on Gabbard as she adjusted her posture slightly, a subtle shift that drew every eye. She didn't need to speak to command the space. Her presence did that for her. Reporters sensing a story unfolding poised their pens over notepads, ready to capture whatever came next. Aides, some of whom had been ready to crown AOC the victor, now watched Gabbard with a mix of curiosity and respect, whispering about the paper she'd held up. The chamber's heavy drapes seemed to absorb sound, making every moment feel weightier. AOC, sensing the need to regain control, leaned forward again, her voice sharp but less certain. "Miss Gabbard, she said you can hold up all the papers you want, but that doesn't change the fact that we're dealing with issues that require new thinking, not old credentials." It was a valiant effort to redirect the narrative, but the room could feel the momentum slipping. Gabbard's calm, her deliberate pacing, had dulled AOC's attack. Gabbard's eyes met AOC's, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink to just the two of them. The crowd reporters' aides all faded as Gabbard prepared to respond. She didn't rush, didn't let the moment's pressure dictate her pace. Instead, she let the silence stretch, letting AOC's words hang, their sharpness blunted by her composure. The folder on the table remained closed, but its presence was a constant reminder of Gabbard's preparation, her readiness to meet any challenge. The crowd could sense it. This was a woman who wouldn't be rattled by a personal attack, no matter how sharp. She was here to make the point, not just about herself, but about the values she stood for, values that went beyond credentials or sound bites. The hearing continued, but the opening clash had set the stage for something bigger. Gabbard's response, when it came, would be more than a defense. It would be a statement about who she was and what she stood for. The room knew it, and they waited, their anticipation building with every second. Gabbard's calm, her quiet strength, had already begun to reshape the narrative, turning AOC's attack into an opportunity for her to shine. The stage was set, and Tulsi Gabbard was ready to show the world what she was made of. The Senate chamber remained charged with the aftershock of the opening clash, the air thick with anticipation as the crowd waited for the next move. Tulsi Gabbard sat at the center of the storm, her calm presence a stark contrast to the tension that still lingered from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's sharp attack. The polished mahogany table before her gleamed under the chamber's lights, her leather folder resting on it like a silent testament to her preparation. Her navy suit remained crisp, her posture relaxed, yet alert, her eyes carrying a quiet intensity that suggested she was far from done. Across the dais, AOC sat with her pen still clutched tightly, her earlier smirk replaced by a cautious focus, as if she sensed the tide had begun to turn. The reporters, their notepads open and pens poised, watched Gabbard closely, sensing a story unfolding. Aides whispered among themselves, their phones buzzing with half-written tweets, while onlookers leaned forward, their eyes darting between the two women. The heavy burgundy drapes seemed to muffle the room's sounds, making every rustle of paper, every shift in a seat, feel momentous. Gabbard's silence in the face of AOC's taunt had already shifted the room's gravity, and now, as she prepared to respond, the crowd could feel something bigger was coming. AOC, unwilling to let the moment slip entirely, leaned forward again, her voice sharp, but tinged with a hint of frustration. "Ms. Gabbard," she said, her words cutting through the chamber's hum, "you can wave around old documents all you want. But that doesn't change the fact that today's challenges, climate, inequality, technology, demand bold, forward-thinking solutions, not stories from a time when people still used dial-up internet."
The jab drew a few murmurs from the younger members of the audience who nodded in agreement, their fingers tapping out posts on their phones to amplify AOC's point. Reporters jotted down her words, sensing a soundbite that could dominate the news cycle. For a moment, it seemed AOC might regain the momentum, her passion and clarity, a reminder of why she'd become a force in Congress. But Gabbard remained unmoved, her expression steady, her hands resting lightly on her folder. The faint smile that had flickered earlier was gone, replaced by a look of quiet determination, like a seasoned debater who knew exactly how to play the long game. Gabbard's silence stretched just a moment longer, letting AOC's words hang in the air, their sharpness dulled by the weight of her composure. Then, with a deliberate motion, she opened her leather folder again, the soft creak of its hinges, cutting through the room's tension like a signal. The crowd's attention sharpened reporters, pausing their typing aids, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of what she might reveal next. Gabbard sifted through the papers inside her fingers, moving with the precision of someone who'd done this countless times in high-stakes settings. She pulled out another document, this one slightly thicker, its edges marked by the faint wear of frequent handling. It bore the seal of a federal court, but she didn't hold it up for show. Instead, she placed it on the table, letting its presence speak for itself. The room's focus tightened, every eye drawn to the document, its significance unspoken but palpable. AOC's eyes flicked to it, her confidence wavering for a split second before she masked it with a tight smile. Congresswoman Gabbard began, her voice low, and measured each word chosen with the care of someone who understood the power of precision. "You mentioned my degree earlier, and I reckon you think it's not much to look at. But let me tell you about a case from a while back." Her tone was calm, almost conversational, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. She glanced at the document, not because she needed to read it, but to draw every eye to it. Here's a record from a federal court, from a time when I was working on a case that wasn't about headlines or sound bites. It was about people, real people who needed someone to fight for them. She paused, letting the words settle, her gaze steady on AOC. The crowd leaned in, their curiosity piqued, as Gabbard began to paint a picture with her words, not of herself, but of the work she'd done. The case, as she described it, was a complex one, involving a small community group caught in a tangle of regulations that threatened their livelihood. Gabbard, then a practicing attorney, had spent months diving into legal texts, meeting with the affected families, and building a case that hinged on a nuanced interpretation of the law. Her argument in court had been meticulous, blending logic with a deep understanding of the human stakes involved. The judge's ruling, documented in the paper before her, had praised her clarity, her command of the law, and her ability to make a complicated issue resonate with those who mattered most. Gabbard didn't boast or delve into self-praise. She let the story speak for itself, her voice steady and unhurried, each word grounding the room in the reality of her work. The document wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a testament to her commitment, a reminder that her credentials, however dated, had been earned through action, not privilege. The room was silent, the weight of Gabbard's words settling over the crowd like a call to attention. Reporters who'd been ready to frame AOC's attack as the story of the day now scribbled notes about Gabbard's response, sensing a shift in the narrative. Aides, some of whom had been typing out tweets in support of AOC, paused their phones, forgotten as they processed the story Gabbard was telling. Even AOC seemed momentarily at a loss, her pen still, her eyes fixed on the table. Gabbard's story wasn't just about one case, it was about a lifetime of showing up, of doing the work that others overlooked. She didn't need to list her accomplishments. The document on the table, the calm in her voice, did that for her. The crowd felt it, their attention shifting from AOC's earlier bravado to Gabbard's grounded resolve. AOC, sensing the need to regain her footing, tried to pivot. "That's a nice story, Ms. Gabbard," she said, her voice sharp, but less certain now. "But one case doesn't make you an expert on the systemic issues we're facing today. The world's changed, and we need people who understand the now, not the then." It was a calculated move, an attempt to steer the conversation back to her narrative of progress versus obsolescence. A few younger aides nodded, and a handful of reporters jotted down her words, but the room could sense the momentum had shifted. Gabbard's response had been too precise, too rooted in reality to be dismissed. She didn't take the bait, didn't let AOC's jab provoke her. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto AOC's with a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the chamber. Congresswoman Gabbard said, her voice still steady, "I don't claim to know everything about today's world, but I know this. The people I've worked for, small business owners, community leaders, everyday folks, they don't care about what's trendy. They care about what's true." The line landed softly but firmly like a stone, dropped into still water, sending ripples through the room. A few onlookers exchanged glances, and a murmur of agreement passed through the older members of the audience. Those who'd seen enough to know that experience often outweighs bravado. Gabbard's words weren't just a defense of her degree. They were a broader statement about service, about showing up for those who needed it most. She went on, her voice growing richer, more compelling. "That case I mentioned wasn't about me. It was about people who'd put everything they had into their community only to see it threatened by rules they didn't write. I spent nights digging through law books not to prove I was smart, but because I knew what was at stake for them." The crowd was captivated, their earlier focus on AOC's flash, now replaced by Gabbard's substance. She didn't need to raise her voice or resort to theatrics. Her story did that for her. The document on the table, the calm in her delivery, the clarity of her purpose, all worked together to flip the narrative. AOC's notes were now a flurry of scribbles, her earlier confidence tempered by the realization that she'd underestimated her opponent. Reporters, sensing a turning point, were already drafting stories framing Gabbard's response as a masterclass in composure and preparation. Aides whispered among themselves, some pulling out their phones to search for the case she'd mentioned. Curious about the woman who'd turned a single document into a moment of authority, Gabbard paused, letting the silence amplify her point. Her eyes moved across the room as if inviting everyone to see themselves in her story. AOC tried to interject, her voice sharper now, tinged with frustration. "Ms. Gabbard, I respect your experience, but we're talking about systemic issues here, not just one community's story. We need bold ideas, not old cases." It was a fair point, but it lacked the sting of her earlier attacks. Gabbard's calm had disarmed her, her story grounding the debate in something real. Something human. Gabbard didn't interrupt, didn't cut her off. She waited, letting AOC's words fade into the chamber's hum before responding. "Congresswoman," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "Systems are made of people, and helping people starts with listening, with showing up, with doing the work, even when no one's watching." The line was simple, but it cut deep, reframing the debate on Gabbard's terms. The crowd murmured again, some nodding in agreement, others whispering about her ability to turn a personal attack into a broader point about service. AOC's notes were now a shield, her earlier poise replaced by a visible effort to regroup. The hearing moved on, but the moment lingered. Gabbard's folder remained on the table, a silent promise of more to come. The reporters who'd been ready to crown AOC the victor were now focused on Gabbard, their stories shifting to highlight her quiet strength and preparation. The aides, too, were captivated, their whispers turning to discussions about the document and the case it represented. The chamber's energy had changed. And Gabbard had done it not with flash or volume, but with the steady resolve of someone who'd earned her place through action. The stage was set for what would come next, and everyone in the room knew it. Tulsi Gabbard was building towards something bigger, and she was ready to show the world what she was capable of. The Senate chamber vibrated with a charged silence, the kind that follows a pivotal moment when the room knows something unforgettable is about to unfold. Tulsi Gabbard sat at the heart of the tension, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the electric anticipation that crackled through the air. The polished mahogany table before her gleamed under the chamber's chandeliers, her leather folder resting on it like a quiet symbol of her preparation. Her navy suit remained impeccable, her posture steady, yet alert, her eyes carrying a focused intensity that hinted at the strategic depth she was about to reveal. Across the dais, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. AOC gripped her pen with a tightness that betrayed her unease, her earlier confidence shaken by Gabbard's measured response to her attack on her law degree. The crowd reporters, aides, and onlookers leaned forward, their eyes darting between the two women, their notepads and phones ready to capture the next move. The heavy burgundy drapes absorbed the room's sounds, making every rustle, every breath feel weighty. Gabbard's earlier move, presenting a court document to counter AOC's taunt, had shifted the narrative, and now the room waited, sensing she was building toward a moment that would redefine the hearing. AOC, determined to reclaim her footing, straightened in her seat, her voice cutting through the chamber's hum with renewed sharpness. "Ms. Gabbard," she said, her tone a mix of defiance and urgency, "you keep talking about your past, your cases, your old-school approach. But we're in a new era. The challenges we face, climate crises, systemic inequality, technological disruption, require bold, innovative solutions, not stories from a time when floppy disks were cutting edge." The jab drew a few nods from the younger aides, their fingers already tapping out posts to amplify AOC's point, framing her as the voice of progress. Reporters scribbled her words, sensing a soundbite that could dominate the news cycle. For a moment, it seemed AOC might regain the momentum, her passion and clarity, a reminder of her ability to command attention. But Gabbard remained unshaken, her expression steady, her hands resting lightly on her folder. The quiet determination in her eyes suggested she was not only prepared for AOC's attack, but ready to turn it into an opportunity. Gabbard let AOC's words hang in the air, her silence a deliberate choice that amplified the room's tension. The crowd watched, their anticipation building as she reached for her folder once more, the soft creak of its hinges cutting through the silence like a signal. But this time, she didn't pull out a document. Instead, she nodded to an aide standing nearby, who stepped forward with a small tablet, its screen glinting under the chamber's lights. Gabbard took it with the same unhurried calm that had defined her presence all day, her fingers moving with the ease of someone who'd navigated countless high-stakes moments. "Congresswoman," she said, her voice low and steady, "I was at an event not too long ago, and I heard something that stuck with me. I think it's worth sharing with everyone here." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that silenced the room, every eye drawn to her as she tapped the tablet. A large screen behind the dais flickered to life, casting a soft glow across the chamber. The crowd leaned in, their curiosity piqued, as the faint hum of a video loading filled the space. The footage began, the sound crackling slightly, but clear enough to recognize the setting, a bustling fundraiser packed with supporters, the kind of event where every word is weighed for impact. AOC's voice came through the speakers, confident and vibrant, addressing the crowd with her trademark energy. "I've worked with people who fought their way up," she said on the recording, her words ringing with conviction. "Folks who went to night school, who earned their degrees through sweat and sacrifice. They're the ones who bring real perspective, who outwork anyone from a fancy university. The crowd in the video erupted in applause, and AOC's face lit up with a smile, her passion undeniable. The screen froze on that moment, her expression a mix of pride and sincerity, and Gabbard let the silence stretch, letting the weight of AOC's words settle over the room like a storm cloud. A gasp rippled through the chamber, soft at first, but growing as the realization hit. Reporters exchanged wide-eyed glances, their fingers hovering over keyboards already drafting posts about the bombshell. Aides whispered to each other, some pulling out their phones to record the moment, sensing it would dominate the news cycle. AOC's face tightened her earlier confidence, giving way to a flicker of unease, her pen now still in her hand. Gabbard didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it linger, allowing the crowd to process what they'd just heard. Then, with a voice as calm as ever, she spoke. "Now, Congresswoman," she said, her eyes locked on AOC. "That sounds an awful lot like the kind of story you were praising, doesn't it? Folks who work hard, who earn their place through grit and determination. Folks like me, with a law degree, earned the hard way, not handed on a silver platter." The room erupted in murmurs, the sound swelling as the crowd processed the irony. Gabbard's move was surgical, exposing the contradiction in AOC's attack with a precision that left no room for retreat. AOC had mocked her degree as outdated, yet here she was on video celebrating the very kind of journey Gabbard had taken, a journey of hard work, late nights, and relentless effort. The hypocrisy was laid bare, and the crowd felt it, their attention now fully on Gabbard, who sat back with the ease of a woman who knew she'd landed her point. Reporters were already typing furiously, framing the moment as a masterclass in debate. Gabbard turns AOC's words against her. One headline would read, while social media lit up with users sharing clips of the video, praising Gabbard's quick thinking and quiet strength. Never underestimate someone who knows your playbook. One tweet read, racking up thousands of likes in minutes. AOC tried to recover her voice, sharp, but less certain now. "Ms. Gabbard, you're twisting my words," she said, her hands gesturing as if to push back the narrative. "I was talking about people who bring fresh ideas, who adapt to today's challenges, not just lean on old credentials." It was a valiant effort, but the room could sense the shift. AOC's earlier attacks had relied on flash and momentum, but Gabbard's response was rooted in something deeper. Truth, consistency, and a quiet authority that didn't need volume to command respect. Gabbard didn't interrupt, didn't cut her off. She waited, letting AOC's words fade into the hum of the chamber before responding. "Congresswoman Gabbard," said, her tone almost gentle, "I'm not twisting anything. I'm just holding up a mirror. You said it yourself, hard work matters. So let's talk about the work, not the noise." The line was a thunderclap, not because it was loud, but because it was undeniable. The crowd murmured again, some nodding in agreement, others whispering about Gabbard's ability to turn a personal attack into a broader point about integrity. AOC's notes were now a flurry of scribbles, her earlier poise replaced by a visible effort to regroup. She fired off a question about policy, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but the room's energy had shifted. Gabbard answered with her usual clarity, her responses grounded in a deep understanding of the issues and their real-world impact. But it was clear the moment belonged to her. The video, the document, her calm delivery had all worked together to flip the narrative, casting her not as a relic, but as a figure of substance, someone who'd earned her place through action, not rhetoric. The aftermath was immediate. Social media exploded with clips of the fundraiser video hashtags trending about Gabbard's brilliance and AOC's misstep. Gabbard just played chess. While AOC played checkers, one user wrote the post, shared thousands of times. Another called it the moment a leader showed what real strength looks like. Reporters were drafting stories, framing the exchange as a turning point, a moment where Gabbard's understated approach had outshone AOC's fire. Aides whispered about her reputation for being prepared, for always having a card to play, and now they'd seen it in action. The chamber continued its business, but the energy had changed. Gabbard sat as she had from the start, calm and composed, her folder untouched, but its presence a constant reminder of her readiness. AOC, though still formidable, seemed to carry the weight of her own words, her momentum blunted by Gabbard's surgical response. The stage was set for what would come next, and everyone in the room knew it. Tulsi Gabbard wasn't just playing defense, she was building toward something bigger, and the world was watching. The Senate chamber hummed with a quiet intensity, the aftermath of Tulsi Gabbard's decisive strike still reverberating through the air. The polished mahogany table before her gleamed under the soft glow of the chandeliers, her leather folder resting on it like a silent emblem of her unshakable resolve. Gabbard sat with the same calm presence that had carried her through the hearing, her navy suit crisp, her posture steady, her eyes warm yet piercing, as if she could see beyond the moment to its lasting impact. Across the dais, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, sat with her notes in disarray, her earlier fire dimmed by the weight of Gabbard's response, a video that had exposed the contradiction in her attack, turning her own words against her. The crowd, reporters, aides, and onlookers remained riveted, their notepads and phones poised to capture the final act of this high-stakes duel. The heavy burgundy drapes seemed to absorb the room's sounds, making every whisper, every shift in a seat feel significant. Gabbard's surgical counter had shifted the narrative, casting her as a figure of substance and integrity, and now the room waited to see how she would close this chapter and what lesson she would leave them with. AOC, still determined to regain control, leaned forward, her voice sharp but lacking the confidence of her earlier attacks. "Ms. Gabbard," she said, her tone measured but tinged with frustration. "Your stories are compelling, but we're here to address systemic issues that affect millions, not just one case or one community. We need big ideas, not nostalgia for past victories." It was a fair point, one that might have landed with force earlier, but Gabbard's presence had changed the room's gravity. Her calm, her preparation, her ability to turn AOC's words against her had made the Congresswoman's argument feel hollow, like a slogan searching for substance. The younger aides, who had earlier nodded in support of AOC, now hesitated, their phones idle as they watched Gabbard. Reporters, sensing the narrative, had shifted, scribbled notes not about AOC's passion, but about Gabbard's quiet authority. The onlookers, too, were captivated, their eyes fixed on Gabbard, waiting for her next move. Gabbard didn't rush to respond. She let AOC's words linger, her silence, a deliberate choice that amplified the room's anticipation. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she placed her hand on her leather folder, not to open it, but to anchor her presence, a reminder of the preparation that had brought her to this moment. "Congresswoman." She began, her voice low and steady, each word carrying the weight of experience. "We've talked a lot today about degrees, about who's qualified and who's not. But let me tell you something I've learned over the years. It's not the paper on your wall that defines you. It's the work you do, the people you serve, and the truth you hold to when the pressure's on." The words landed softly but powerfully, silencing the chamber. Reporters paused, their pens hovering over notepads, sensing a moment that would make headlines. Aides who'd been whispering about the video now leaned forward, their phones forgotten. Even AOC seemed to pause her pen. Still, her eyes fixed on Gabbard, Gabbard's voice grew richer, more compelling as she continued. I've met people all over this country, farmers struggling with bad policy, small business owners fighting to keep their doors open, parents working 2 jobs to give their kids a chance. They don't ask me where I got my degree. They ask if I'll listen, if I'll fight for them. And that's what I've done, day in and day out. Her words were not just a defense of her credentials. They were a call to something universal, something that resonated with everyone in the room, regardless of their politics or background. The aides, many of whom had clawed their way into these halls, nodded subtly. The reporters who'd started their careers at small-town papers felt a connection to her story. The onlookers who'd faced their own battles to be heard saw themselves in her words. Gabbard wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for anyone who'd ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told they didn't belong. She paused, letting the silence amplify her point, her eyes sweeping the room as if inviting everyone to see themselves in her story. When I was a young lawyer, she continued, her tone warm but resolute. I took on cases no one else wanted, cases for people who couldn't pay much, who'd been written off. I didn't do it for applause or headlines. I did it because it was right. And every time someone tried to tell me I wasn't enough, I let my work answer for me. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that filled the room, a reminder that Gabbard's career wasn't built on flash or privilege, but on a relentless commitment to doing what was right. The crowd was silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a call to action. Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing they'd just heard a quote that would echo across op-eds and social media. Aides nodded, some visibly moved, as if Gabbard's words had spoken directly to their own struggles. AOC tried to defend her point, but Gabbard's calm, grounded response reframed the debate, stressing that big ideas only matter if they truly help people, and that starts with listening and showing up. The quiet yet powerful exchange drew admiration from the room and set social media ablaze, portraying Gabbard as a master of turning challenges into lessons on integrity and service. By the hearing's end, attention kept returning to her steady presence, leaving a lasting message that true leadership is proven through consistent action, not volume or spectacle.